You're tuned into the Writing Community Chat Show, the live streaming YouTube podcast that brings you the stories of authors, screenwriters, and more. Indie or established, this show's for the community, and we invite you to be a part of it. Head to the writingcommunitychatshow.com for more info. The WCCS. Together as one, we get it done.
Hello and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Writing Community Chat Show. I have already dramatically messed that up, haven't I? But hello, how are you doing? Please get in touch with us and let us know how your week has been. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm very good, Agate, and I'm glad I'm back because I thought for a minute there I wasn't needed.
Well, of course you needed, as always. Yeah, no, that was just a very simple mistake that I've not actually made before, I don't think. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, first time for everything. And if you didn't know who tonight's guest was, now you do. So
absolutely, yeah. Brilliant.
Feel free to get excited.
Yeah, we're just talking about very briefly before we started about writing and how it's going at the moment. A little bit about AI, which is stuff we'll get into through the show, which is really cool. Because our guest is very deep in the publishing world and has experienced that for a long time. So it's interesting to see those modern changes taking place. But Chris, I mentioned I'm putting my screenplay back into a novel. It was a bit of a tricky process. How has your writing been?
Yeah, it's been good. What have I done this week? I have done stuff. So I'm finishing a short story this week, and I've been adding to 2 novellas that I've kind of got on the go. So I have been writing. Yeah, it'd be interesting tonight actually to speak to tonight's guest about, like, I think the size of books. I don't know if, we're on Substack, obviously. So we should probably talk about that. And what I've noticed, I've started as well myself with a serialized book. So I'm basically going to release a chapter a week. That you can read on Substack and see how it goes. At the minute, it's getting about 40 people viewing it, and I'm assuming they're reading it because the numbers are the same. But yeah, it's exciting. I think it's a different way of tackling publishing and getting into the sort of writing world and getting people reading your stuff. So yeah, interesting things going on.
I think that's definitely a way to kind of build your author brand and your author profile. And bring those readers into your work. But what do you kind of hope to extract from putting it on Substack in that sense, where you're releasing that information, or even your earlier drafts in that case?
I think for me that I haven't written the published novel yet that I think this is a publishing house type novel. And I think a lot of the writing that I do, I don't do it for that. Like there'll probably be a day where I'm like, right, I'm going to write a book that I know I can sell to a publishing house that is similar to this, it's similar to this. But at the minute, because I'm still sort of like just finding my own voice and knowing what I kind of like to write, I just want to get it out there. I want people to read it. I don't want it sat in my drawer. You know, I don't want to necessarily turn it into a book and create a cover and everything for it. I just want to kind of test the water, I suppose, with the things that I'm writing and see if there is any sort of readership out there for the stuff that I'm doing. And it's like the other day, I wrote a non-fiction piece on like depression, and I thought, why am I writing this when I was writing it? But I did. And then when I posted it, I thought, why am I posting this? And I thought, you know what, if it helps one person, then it's worth posting.
It helped me. So yeah, thank you for that. But that's the beauty of stuff like that, where it's not specifically your author writing, which it can be, as you've explained, but also that kind of content that you have within inside you that could be really valuable to someone. Like openly, we discussed mental health in the show numerous times, and last week I was going through quite a bit of a slump, and you released that kind of writing at kind of the right time. So that for me, having access to those kind of articles that people put on Substack is really kind of valuable. So yeah, I definitely appreciated that.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, I'm the same. I've had a lot of people that have read their work on Substack. You know, it's different to anything else because it's all in one place and it's kind of familiar to things that we're used to. So it's similar to Twitter, but it's not It's similar to reading somebody's blog, but you don't have to go directly to their website because it'll just pop up in your notifications and things like that. You subscribe, which I think gives it a more personal element as well, because you see it in your inbox, which can be a bit annoying. Ross Young is a fan of the show and a friend of the show, so I can say this. But this morning I was having a couple of chats with him, and then he just, when I went on my inbox later on, it was just full of his name. So it just reminded me that I'd been speaking to Ross. So that side of things can be a bit irritating. But like I said, it is a personal sort of connection that you don't necessarily get in other platforms. So
yeah, definitely. And of course, we're on Substack now. We've made a big decision to move our content onto Substack. It's going to be more of a slow burning process compared to where we are on our YouTube subscribers, but obviously we'll still release great content for everybody. But yeah, we're hoping to build that readership for us as well, and that following on there as well. So it's a platform that I hope writers are using and should be. And it's very interesting to see how well other people are doing on there as well. So it's a tried and tested process. So if you're interested in that and you want to know more, either go online and have a look, or just get in touch with us. We're very open, willing to chat to you about it. So yeah, it's definitely helping Chris, for example, building his author profile in that sense. So
exactly.
Yeah, are you ready to get tonight's guest on?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait. Really excited.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. And that's the other thing with Substack, by the way, just before we do, that allows you to build your email list, which I'm sure is a valuable tool still for many authors. And hopefully our guest will confirm that a bit later on. So welcome to another exciting episode of the Writing Community Chat Show. And today we are honored to be joined by one of the most respected voices in the publishing industry, Jane Friedman. With nearly 25 years of experience, Jane has become a beacon of knowledge and guidance for authors navigating the complex world of publishing. Jane's career has been dedicated to helping writers not only hone their craft, but also understand the essential business side of writing, which we all know is a very difficult part of the process. And her book, The Business of Being a Writer, is a must-read for any writer looking to hone their passion into a sustainable career. In addition to her writing, Jane is the editor of The Hot Sheet, an indispensable newsletter for authors, and was named Publishing Commentator of the Year by Digital Book World in 2023. She has also been featured across major media outlets, and her work with organizations like the Authors Guild continues to bring much needed transparency to the industry. So sit back, relax, and get ready to gain some invaluable insights from one of the industry's leading experts. Hello, and welcome to the show. Please help me welcoming Jane Friedman. Hello, Jane.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
You are very welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Excellent. And for the people watching, where in the world are you coming from tonight?
I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio, the great Midwest.
Amazing. Yeah. So we're just talking before it. We came on the show about weather. It's a really boring subject that we get into. But in the US, it's, and obviously everywhere, the summer is, I think we're on the downslope now from summer going. So is summer something that you kind of really embrace and enjoy yourself, or is it still business all the way through the year for you?
I mean, I conduct my business as usual. There are no summer hours in my business, and it's really hot, and I would rather be inside anyway. It's about 95 degrees Fahrenheit, which I discovered is about 35 Celsius.
Yeah, which is really hot. So yeah, like air conditioning in the US, that's the thing, and we don't generally do that. So I'm guessing your office is nice and cool.
Yes, it is.
Ah, that's the way. Definitely.
Nice.
Yeah. Chris has got his kids around.
Yeah, I'm in the process of trying to mute my mic, but also still be in the conversation. So I'm at that point. So if I go quiet for a bit, it's not because I'm trying to be rude.
We embrace the life here. It's absolutely fine. Hello to Joanne in the chat. Thank you for joining us, and it's great to see you here. Again, get your pens ready, because there's bound to be some great advice and tips throughout the show for you to take away. Jane, we like to go back in people's history to learn about their kind of careers and their road to writing and publishing. So with you, was there anything that really kind of drew you to the career that you kind of pursued at an early age? And do you remember what that was?
Well, I grew up in a very rural area, and there were only a couple of activities if you were on the straight and narrow that you could participate in. Um, there was school, um, there was sports, but I was the most awkward child you can imagine, and there was the library, and my mother was in fact a librarian. So, I spent a lot of hours in the library. I spent a lot of hours reading books, because it didn't cost anything to do so. So I would say the roots of where I am today go back to that.
Yeah, it's a really good to have that kind of role model in your life that have opens you up to the world of reading. And there's a lot of people that I work with at the moment who never picked a book up before, and I'm trying to explain to them the value of that. Do you remember kind of what you were reading at that young age that really took you to another place? Is what reading really is for a lot of people, escapism. What was that escape for you?
Yeah, some of the earliest books I read were some of the classics in the United States, like the Judy Blume books, the Fudge books, Henry and Ribsy stories, Encyclopedia Brown. I also read a UK author. Is there named Sue Townsend? Or it was
Yeah, there is a Sue Townsend. Yeah,
it's
I
like
think she's an actress as well.
I might be getting the name wrong. Maybe I just have the first name right, Sue. But it was Adrian Mole Diaries. That was
Oh yeah,
right. I can't remember. I'm really getting the author name incorrect. But I remember loving that. And when I got a little bit older, the Anne of Green Gables series. But when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of YA literature as there is today. Kind of the equivalent would have been the Sweet Valley High series, which was about two blonde-haired twins. Looking back, it's not the sort of thing that I would choose for myself, but it was kind of like there was limited selection, and so that's what I ended up with. I also really loved the Usborne nonfiction books, and there were just a handful of them. And I remember when I first went to London Book Fair, looking for their booth there because I just still have this really fond childhood memory of their books.
Nice. And Chris, got a question there?
No, I mean, I was just going to say, obviously, from that, the fact that obviously you become a reader, when you got to London Fair and you went to the booth, was there any sort of like step up from that in terms of going, you're a reader and you enjoy the process of reading, but then when did you think, oh, writing could be something that I'm into? Did somebody at that booth say, do you know what? This is how I do it. Maybe try it yourself.
Oh, well, I didn't end up at London Book Fair until I was already, nearly 20 years into my career. So,
wow.
But when I was in middle school, I ended up being the editor-in-chief of the school newspaper, which I didn't even really know entirely what that meant for me in terms of responsibility. I just knew I wanted it. And so the teacher informed me it would be my job each issue to write a little editorial piece,
Nice.
Which I enjoyed. And, so in school, I often ended up on whatever the publication was available to me to work on. And it just grew from there.
Did you find that you had to really learn how to do that process, or was it quite a natural thing for you?
As far as writing, that was, to me, I always considered it an enjoyable activity. It wasn't something that anyone had to pressure me to do. And then when I realized the older I got, I had a knack for editing other people's work and like spotting errors from across the room, that sort of thing, that other people, they just didn't, either they didn't care enough, or they didn't just have that attention to detail in the language. Yeah. And certainly I had some classes growing up that I really loved, that focused on grammar, style, punctuation. I still lived in the era, or I grew up in the era where you diagrammed sentences. I'm not sure that's even done anymore, but I love doing that. So the kind of the engineering approach to language was very appealing to me.
Yeah, I'm certainly in the category of probably not taking enough time and certainly not noticing the grammatical errors in stuff. And that's been proven in my work. But yeah, for me, it's editing is just kind of like a hardship for me. It's not the enjoyable process. I know a lot of people really enjoy it. So for you, when you see people's work like that, does it make you feel like they just haven't put the effort in, or is it kind of one of those things you just accept that some people kind of don't really pick it up like you do?
Oh, I don't judge. So it's not something where I would think someone hasn't put in enough time or they don't care, because I do feel like the ability to tell a good story or to write a book or to do any number of things related to publishing. But I don't equate knowing your grammar and style with good writing. You can have the technicians come in and take care of that for you.
Yeah.
There's no shame in it.
Well, that's what I love about a lot of the, sorry, Chris, a lot of the publishers and authors we speak to who work with the publishing team. And they do rely on their editors and their line editors and everybody that plays that different kind of part to build that book into that into that kind of magical kind of piece that they pass on to the reader. So yeah, we've heard that quite a few times, that it is a team effort, and I like that.
Yes.
I was going to say, my question was kind of going to stem from that, in terms of, I read something somewhere the other day that, you know, the great writers have great teams around them, and that's why I was going to link to it. When did you first realize that that is what was happening in the publishing world, and how did you find your team?
Well, it probably started before I entered book publishing proper. When I was in college, I was on the college newspaper, and there was no way a single person could possibly put out something of that size every week. And it required different specializations, and it required people coming together and collaborating to make a product that the quality was bigger than any one of us could have achieved on our own. Later, when I started interning at a book publishing house, you know, obviously there things are very specialized and are in separate departments, and sometimes to publishing's detriment, unfortunately. So you definitely, at that time, when I got into like my very first position, they still separated out the editor who handled pages with the author. They divided that editor from the person who really looked at it in its laid out, designed form. Those were considered two different types of jobs. Later, it got combined into one. So I think, you know, this conversation gets really interesting, especially when you move over into the self-publishing area, where people might not have the network yet, or the connections, the relationships, to help them figure out who they want on their team. Or if you haven't ever worked with a traditional publisher, you don't know what a well-functioning team looks like. And so it typically takes more than one book, maybe more than several books, to figure out, okay, who do I really need to help fill in the gaps and complement what I bring to the table.
Wow. It's interesting to hear that, because how would you suggest, say for example, self-published authors, how do they go and find a team, or how do they find the right kind of people to work with? And when they first do that, as you mentioned, it might not be the right fit. So how do they look out for kind of the right people?
I think some people initially might flounder a bit if they haven't yet been networking or going to conferences, or if they're not a member of organizations like the Alliance of Independent Authors. If they're just kind of working in isolation, I think those sorts of folks might end up at places like Fiverr or Readsy, or they might call up their local college, or they ask their aunt who used to be an English teacher, you know, that sort of thing, which none of this is bad. It's just like, you might not even really know what you're looking for. You might be basing your choice on price or budget, which again, sometimes that's mandatory. There's only so much you can pay, or you might deal in trades or swaps with other folks until you kind of build up some momentum and actually earn some money off of your books. So I think the people that are, once they've been in this space long enough, they start to realize the value that other people can bring into the process, and how that over time leads to more sales and leads to more success. And so I think often you have referrals and word of mouth among authors in very specific genres, because I do think some of the team that you want around you, it's going to be people who really understand the genre you're working in, what the expectations of readers are in that genre, and what sort of bar you're trying to meet, not just for yourself, but the readership you're serving.
Excellent.
That is really good advice. Again, I keep talking about things that I've read, but I read somewhere that somebody said that you should only write when you're enjoying it. And it kind of like, it really irritated me a little bit, because I thought I don't always enjoy the process. But I suppose my question off the back of that is, when did you find the things that you enjoyed writing about and you knew that, this is what I'm writing about, this is what I want to do with my career?
So keeping in mind that, well, I'll talk about my professional writing. I'll just focus on that for now. So my professional writing, of course, is for writers, publishers, industry people, people who are concerned with the making of books or earning a living from their writing. And so I was in an editorial role for many years before I realized I had something I really wanted to say to people about how technology was changing publishing. And this was around, I want to say 2007, 2008. I'm not going to say that prior to that time I had nothing to say, but I don't know that I had something to say that was truly unique to myself and what I was observing out in the industry. So this was when I was about maybe 10 years into my career. I just noticed that people were starting to have kind of the same sorts of fears and resistance and, you know, all of the challenges that technology can present. And so I just came at it with a much more open attitude. And I found that people gravitated toward the things that I wrote when I was talking about, whether it was social media, ebooks, Amazon and Kindle, self-publishing, or other changes that were happening. I would try to explain as best I could the patterns that I saw in the changes and how people could orient themselves in a way that was productive rather than self-defeating.
It's kind of interesting what you mentioned earlier, how writers can sometimes be often a recluse anyway, but in a recluse in the sense they're not reaching out and networking with the right kind of people. So to do that and not see the changes that you're presenting, because a lot of people wouldn't know where to find that information, is kind of almost keeping themselves behind the times. So for you to offer that information is really valuable, just to get it out there in front of the people, especially those that are in that situation. So go on, sorry.
No, you go.
I was going to say, how did you kind of find the reaction to that work you were presenting then, showing the updated kind of changes in the industry? Were people kind of confused by that or struggling to keep up, or were they just really grateful that they tapped into that kind of newest kind of thing to help them along with their own journey?
Yeah, all of those things. So at that time, and this is like between the years of, I would say like 2008 and 2012, it was just a period of great upheaval and uncertainty, as well as optimism. And I have to also clarify, this was at a time, at least in the United States, when we tended to see technology, Silicon Valley, and those types of companies as maybe more, we saw them more charitably than we do today. But at that period, I think there was a lot of fear among writers about what does the future of publishing hold? Will traditional publishing survive? A lot of people were worried that ebooks would somehow kill traditional publishing, or that self-publishing would kill traditional publishing, which has not come to pass. And, you know, there were also the dynamics of how people discovered things were changing because of Amazon, because of social media, because of the internet. And so I tried to help people see that dynamic for what it is. And also, I tried to draw way back and look at the bigger picture of how authors operate in society and culture. And over decades, their business model has always been changing. The traditional publishing business model hasn't really changed that much over, like, since Gutenberg, over the last 500 years. But if you look at writers, how they earn money has shifted with technology. It shifted with the rise of literacy and the introduction of magazines and newspapers and advertising. It changed with the advent of bookstores, massive bookstores like Barnes and Noble. It changed with Amazon, et cetera, and it's going to keep changing. And so I like helping writers see that bigger picture to reduce the fear and anxiety, because if you just, the fear and anxiety, it's very unproductive to focus on that and still write and publish.
Do you know then, over the past 25 years of your career, which is an exceptional time to work in the publishing industry, you would have seen so many changes throughout that time. And obviously you talked about them and you've learned about them to share that information. Was there anything that really surprised you more than most over that 25-year period?
With ebooks, like around the 2012 to 2014 time period, it really seemed to me like they would end up being maybe half of all publishing sales.
Yeah.
I didn't expect print to die, but I did expect it to decline much more than it has. And there were certainly lots of people predicting based on trend lines, at how much the ebook market would be. Like by this point, they would have probably predicted 60 to 70%. And that has not happened for traditional publishing. It has happened for some other sectors, like you could look at self-publishing and romance, for example. And certainly with traditional publishers, if you just look at, let's say, the very commercially driven genre fiction areas, if you look at digital of audio plus ebook, then I do think it's probably approaching 50%, if not more. So, and that brings me to the other change that I had never really anticipated because I'm not an audiobook listener. The growth of audiobooks, I mean, it just hasn't slowed down since, I want to say 2012, maybe even a little bit earlier than that. It's just growth year after growth year after growth year after growth year. And it's still very dynamic. I still think there's more change to come because we have Spotify now entering the market and shaking things up.
I've definitely noticed that recently. Audible, Spotify, even I think Amazon offering sort of free audiobooks here and there. So they're drawing a bigger crowd all the time. And, it's a really interesting thing for a lot of self-published authors. Probably haven't thought about that yet. But that's another avenue for them to go down. So yeah, definitely keeping on top of those things is worth doing.
Yeah. Jane, my question off the back of that was, if you're in the bubble of publishing, how do you have the capacity and the scope to see the bigger picture? Because I work in a teaching background, and I know that teachers, they'll just stick to this is what we do, this is what we know, this is what works. And I sometimes go, yeah, but look at this big picture and look at these things that people are saying over here. And they just don't want to know. So how do you, one, do that? And then how do you sort of make people listen to the big picture in the right way?
There are two things that I personally do. One is I really tune in to the contrarians inside the industry or at the periphery of the industry, especially people who are trying to do something that kind of goes against the grain. A very recent example of this, although everyone might not agree with me, is Authors Equity. So this is a startup publisher launched by the former CEO of Penguin Random House, which is a very different model of publishing. It's a company that has authors as investors. So Tim Ferriss, James Clear, Louise Penny are some of the initial investors, and they're paying higher royalties. And then the author, I would assume it's more of a collaborative arrangement where the author is calling more of the shots and deciding who their editor is and their designer is. And those people are freelancers and not full-time employees, which Authors Equity has caught a lot of criticism for. Yeah. But whenever I see lots of criticism focused at a startup, it gets me interested. What are they doing that is so upsetting to people? Now, sometimes companies are just straight up predatory. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about people pushing against, the norms of the industry that they're in. So I love looking at the contrarians. And then outside of the industry, I just like to read a lot of analysis from other sectors, whether it's the tech industry or magazine people or economists, Tyler Cohen, for example. I like to expose myself to a lot of different viewpoints so that I can try to eliminate or at least reduce what my own blind spots are. I try not to, I actually wrote this recently in a comment. I don't like putting the book on a pedestal. So while my life has been very much focused on book publishing, I don't consider the book this sacred object. It's It's also a product. It's also a way for people to capitalize on their fame. It's also a way for people to tell a great story. Like, it does a lot of things in today's world. And I think arguably we're actually saturated. Like, there are millions of books that come out every year, and there's only a small number of them that actually make a difference. And that's not to be pessimistic. I'm just trying to speak to reality.
So let's say somebody watching this now has got their shiny object or their shiny product in their hand, finished first draft of something. And they're seeing all these roads in publishing in front of them. You know, they can go the traditional route, they can go the self-published route, they could go the, you know, the authoritarian route that you just mentioned. Lots of different routes for them. Yeah. What would your advice be to them? What would you say?
Well, the really boring answer that no one wants to hear is it depends on your goals. I bet people are really tired of hearing that.
Put your goals in the chat. What are your goals? We'll judge off them.
So let me first say there's no right or wrong path, and whichever one you choose, it's not going to affect your ability to switch lanes later on. And more, I'm finding that authors are playing both sides or all particular sides, because there's, you know, there's more than 2 or 3 options. There's a lot of different options and hybrids and etc. So I find, like, if you look at some of the most successful authors today, like Colleen Hoover, you know, she started off self-publishing. She now traditionally publishes, but still has some self-published work. And now she also has like merchandising and runs, or used to run, something called Book Bonanza. I'm not sure if that will continue in the future. And you have the science fiction author whose name I am now blanking on, who ran the $41 million Kickstarter, Brandon Sanderson. So he had these secret novels he wrote during the pandemic, sold them direct to reader, while he also traditionally publishes with Tor. So I find that, interestingly, the more successful you get, usually the more paths you're walking down, or you're combining them depending on what you want out of that particular project at that particular time. When you're first starting out, you know, it's sometimes people don't have the benefit of choice, because if you can't get an agent, that really curtails your traditional publishing options. Small presses, you have to be so patient. Sometimes I'm not sure it's worth waiting for them to tell you if they're going to work with you or not. And so then you're left with self-publishing, or funding that through all sorts of means, whether that's a crowdfunding campaign, Patreon, Substack, etc. So I do find that probably one of the skills that's becoming more critical, I think, over time, which writers, I think sometimes they get depressed by this, is that the more you yourself can find your readership, the better positioned you are, no matter what path you go down. So I think that's like the long and short answer.
Well, we've discussed this, Chris, before, right? I'm sure you've mentioned this, how we've had authors on who have seemingly been in a better position to be picked up by a publisher because their following and the author following is already established, you know?
And not only that, we've had authors on the show that have come through the self-published route. They've been picked up by traditional publishing houses. They've not liked the deal or the way it goes. And then they've gone back to doing things themselves. They've gone, you know, back. I think what you're saying, obviously, there's so many ways to be successful, but you have to find your own voice and sort of stay true to that. But
yeah,
I think it's so difficult to do that, because people are automatically sort of going, oh, well, this is doing really well, or, oh, maybe I should write, you know, the amount of people that we've had on the show that have talked about going into crime fiction. And we're like, why have you gone into writing crime? And they go, you know, I actually had one conversation with an author in a pub, and I said to him, why do you write crime? And I'm not going to mention his name, but he just said, I write it because I'm good at it and it sells. And I was like, God, man, you just destroyed my like perception of you now. Like, you write it because you're good at it and because it sells, and that's it. Like, he said, I had no other interest than that. Like, you know, I had literally typed in my computer, best-selling genres, didn't fancy romance, and then got into crime. But yeah, I suppose a question off the back of that: how do you? Once you've found your voice, how do you stay true to that without being distracted by all the flashy lights of, you know, fame and fortune and all that jazz?
Well, this is a tough question because, again, it goes back to what do you want out of all of this? So I actually meet a lot of writers who their whole point is fame and fortune or riches or, something to do with prestige and status. And they might not, in fact, really like writing. Whether they've admitted that to themselves is another matter. But this is, they see, they imagine, wouldn't it be nice if I were a best-selling novelist? That seems so cool to me. I want to do that. But they don't, in fact, like the writing work. And there's the metaphor I like to use is the tennis player, for those who are tennis fans. I think he's playing right now, Djokovic. He's like one of the top ranked tennis players. And he had an interview within the last couple years where a journalist asked him, he's like, how is it that you're at the top of your sport? And he says, well, I really like hitting the ball. And the journalist just kind of looks at him like, all right. But doesn't everyone like hitting the ball? I mean, give me a break. And he replies, no, actually, I can tell. I play with people. I play against people every day. And you can see it. They don't enjoy playing the sport. They're here for other reasons. But I actually like hitting the ball. And so I think if you're wondering, how do I not get distracted by whatever it happens to be? It could be the fact that everyone's now on TikTok or everyone's now on Substack or everyone's doing whatever it happens to be, chasing romantasy. All you have to think about is, what ball do I like hitting? And just keep hitting that ball. Because if you do that again and again and again and again, you are going to radically outperform anyone else who actually doesn't like hitting that particular ball.
It's brilliant. And if you understand tennis, you will get that reference, because a lot of people from tennis professionals go from a young age where their parents kind of almost force them into that and take them to every session. So there'd be a lot of people going up in that industry that are just doing it because that's what they've known and been put into. And people who have that kind of conception that they're going to write because they want the fame and the fortunes and the top bestsellers, that is a kind of a short-term goal. Because a lot of the authors we speak to, we always ask at the end, what does success look like for you? And the majority of the biggest authors or the best-selling authors we've had on this show, not in the best-selling, but the people who've had a great career, they always say their goal is to keep people reading, keep them happy. It's never about that kind of shorter term goal. So maybe that is the kind of representation in the writing industry then, that it's keeping the people happy and your readers happy and people reading, rather than just trying to hit that number one spot.
Right. I think if you look at someone like Brandon Sanderson, to me, he's somewhat, even though I've never spoken to him or met him, feels to me like he's someone who really likes what he's doing.
Yeah.
And there's just a sense of effortlessness I get whenever I read a profile. Conversely, and this could be extremely unfair, I don't know, but I see Colleen Hoover hasn't put out a book in more than a year. And the New York Times recently did a profile of her, kind of like hinting at, is she going to go back to writing books?
Yeah. She's just riding the wave, at the TikTok wave, because she kind of blew up on TikTok, and so many people were almost as a trend showing off her book. And perhaps that wasn't even the best book of the year. I had a lot of comments, or read a lot of comments that suggested it wasn't. So, but the trend was there.
Right. So I'm very curious to see if what ball she likes to hit going forward. Will she go back to writing more? I have no idea.
I suppose we see it ourselves as well. Like, we've interviewed obviously like 300 odd people now on the show, and some of the best books I've read for the show are not necessarily the most popular books, and not even close. And some of them, like, we've had offers that we've spoken to afterwards, and it's been like, oh, I might have to give it up or whatever, because they're not having that commercial success. And then equally on the flip side, we've had people who've not had commercial success, but like, I don't care if anyone's reading, I'll still write, I'll keep writing. Like, doesn't matter if it just stays in a drawer. Like, we've actually had people on the show say, I've written books that are just in drawers that nobody's seen, and obviously they're doing it for the love. And but I suppose, what would you say to somebody who had the sort of ambition to get better in both areas of first of all, writing, obviously improving their craft, but then trying to improve the persona side of it, I suppose, and the marketing side. So what advice would you give to somebody for looking to improve both areas?
So initially, you have to decide what you're willing to sustain for years on end, because to me, that's the only criteria or qualification or principle I see for success with marketing, platform building, visibility, is that it takes so much time. I really don't think it makes sense to try it from, let's see if this works and I can blow up in 3 months on TikTok or whatever. I mean, that's like hoping for a lightning strike, and lightning strikes do happen.
Yeah.
I just don't advocate basing your future on a lightning strike. So for me, the most sustainable things for the majority of authors are usually keeping a website up to date. Doesn't mean you have to have a blog. Just having like your digital business card 24/7, telling people who you are, what you care about, what you write, with a sign up to your email newsletter. So the email newsletter is something that sometimes that gets overshadowed by Substack a little bit because it has this email newsletter functionality, but Substack is a lot of different things. It's a little bit of a Swiss Army knife right now because it's as much social media as it is email newsletter. I'm just talking about email newsletter, something to keep you in touch with the people who are already interested in your work, not strangers, but the people who've read something you did, or maybe they met you at a writing event. They're getting familiar with your work, and you want to make sure that you can stay in touch with them in the months and years to come. To me, that's an investment that you're making in your career, like money in the bank, because whenever you have something new come out, you can now let the most important people know without paying for a big ad campaign or just relying on hope that they hear about it through some network. And then after that, things start to become, I think, very squishy. So some people are very good at social media and being visible that way. I don't think it's a requirement, but it's really powerful because it's like having potentially an open office door to anyone in the world, any other author, any other influencer, bookstore owner, librarian, reviewer. So it's hard to say no. But on the other side of that, there's a lot of power to be had in your local scene, in your regional scene, in the state or county that you live in, and being a really active literary presence there and being known as the author in that region. I think people, I don't know, sometimes we discount the local connections we have or our professional connections, but many authors start out with exactly that, and the ripple effect goes out from there. Usually your first events are locally or regionally, and when you get media or attention for that, or it goes well, one person tells another person, and then you start getting more invites and more visibility. And so, but that said, there's some people who really do not like being out in the world like that. And so, but what I would say is whatever your personality or whatever your strengths, you have to find the thing that helps you build the visibility, and that is also sustainable.
I'd be very interested to know how many people that tune into this show have actually done that and got themselves engaged in the community, because it is a very powerful thing. And as we mentioned, some writers are very kind of shy. So would they have the kind of confidence to do that? But I think it's a really good tool. Not only to do that because you are spreading that book around the community, but also it gives you that confidence to go and do those kind of talks. Because if you do go down the route of becoming a more successful author, they probably will become more of a requirement. So yeah, I think I'd be interested to know how many people are doing that or have done that.
And on the flip side of that then, in terms of improving as a writer, obviously I'm aware of the time as well, but I want to go into the sort of the new technologies that are available to people, and how people could utilize them to improve what it is they're already doing. And just your professional opinion, I suppose, in terms of like, what should people avoid? What should people embrace? Yeah, I suppose that's the question.
In terms of technology?
Yeah.
Well, I think the big one that's on people's minds right now is AI, generative AI. So tools like ChatGPT, that would be the big one. Currently, Controversial, for good reason, because the models are built on work that's copyright protected, and there hasn't been permission. So
Mm,
I am confident that will work its way through the courts.
mm,
Notice that the models are still operating. There has been no injunction. Um,
mm,
even though there is an argument for copyright infringement,
mm,
it's going to sort itself out. So I just say that to kind of preface, I think it's okay to use the tools. I don't think
mm,
it like from a legal standpoint, I think it's okay to use the tools. It's
mm,
going to be up to your own personal moral compass, whether you engage with them. I do, because I think they're very
mm,
useful. So even if you're not using it to write things, I think it can be very helpful to have it evaluate things. If you're writing a scene and you're stuck, to ask it for ideas, to help it shorten or lengthen or point out things that you might have missed. So it's like having like a little writing partner or a little coach that can assist you with all sorts of brainstorming, outlining, summarization types of tasks.
Mm.
And yes, there are people who will actually use it to write things from scratch. And there are certainly people in the self-publishing side of things who are already doing that. But I just think as someone to
mm.
help perform a gut check for you, it's really, really useful.
Definitely.
Mm.
There was in fact,
And
sorry, go on.
no, I was just going to say, can you give any examples of like how you've used it? I know you said about a gut check and things like that, and maybe
Yeah.
checking certain things or giving you an idea, but can you give like practical examples or things that people could do that you find really useful? Yeah, just sort of hints and tips, I suppose.
Sure. So I am working on the second edition of my book, The Business of Being a Writer, and my publisher requires me to write 100-word summaries of each chapter. I did not do
Mm.
that. I asked AI to do it. It was wonderful. It did such a good job. It saved me so much time.
But see, the difference there is that's your content being
Yes.
addressed or adjusted, not created. So that's where the difference
Right.
is, I think.
And then I've also used it to help me with marketing plans for that book. So, like, for example, I know I want to do a podcast tour when the book comes out, and I've asked ChatGPT, this is what my book is about. I want to appear on writing and publishing podcasts. Please give me a list of 15. And it spit out some that I've actually been on, some that I've heard of but have not been on, and then others that had never occurred to me or I hadn't seen that, yes, I should be asking them if I can be a guest. And you can do that with all number of opportunities. Newspapers, magazines, YouTube channels, influencers, websites, and blogs. So it's really great for marketing brainstorms.
Do you think it's just sort of going to cleanse the publishing industry in terms of like, if you utilize it in the right way? For example, drafts shouldn't be coming in with any errors anymore, really, because you could ask an AI to be an editor and to check your grammar or to check your punctuation or whatever, and it could do all that sort of stuff. So do you think it'll just make everyone just that little bit more professional, or do you just, I don't know, what are your thoughts and fears for the future? So in terms of like, what could be really good about it and what could be terrible about it?
So I do think it raises the bar. So like if you there's no excuse for C- work, any longer. It can at least be C+ or B-. And there was, in fact, I listened to a panel with the academic publisher, Johns Hopkins, here in the United States. And they were saying, well, yeah, just as we would expect you as an author to run spell check or, these other automated tools, he predicts that very soon publishers will have expected that you already asked AI to help you catch things like missed citations, which is something that its authors have already been doing so that they can turn in something that's more cleaned up. And that way the editors can focus on the higher level, bigger picture concerns that AI really can't help with, at least not as of today. It's also allowing for more economical translations. So whether that's nonfiction or fiction, there's a Europe-based translation firm that is, having a AI-assisted human-driven translation process, the first pass is AI translated, and then the humans come in and then take it to completion. And, some people feel like, oh, you're taking jobs away from translators, but actually, no, you're creating more jobs for translators because otherwise translation's so expensive. And so this is why it often doesn't happen for many books, is because you can't get the sales to where they need to be to pay for 100% human translation. So if you bring in these assistants, it makes it much more efficient, cheaper, and people are still getting a wage that they deserve for the work. So I think we're going to see that up and down the editing and publishing process. I don't think that publishing jobs are currently threatened. But I can only speak about what the technology can do today. People keep saying, oh, it's going to become so much more powerful and it will do so much more. And like, well, okay, when it does, then I'll be ready to talk about it, but I can't speculate.
It's interesting, isn't it? I just had a very quick look, and we are number 35 on the list of writing podcasts. So make sure you get through 35 of them to get to us. There was a couple of statements earlier. Halo says, I try to get involved with the community, but my books usually scare the community away. We can confirm that with Halo's books. And Joanne says, I want to translate his translations, but I can't afford it. That's what we're just chatting about there. So yeah, interesting. And Chris, you were right. We're pushing on time. So what we'd like to do is get your questions in, people watching. Jane is here to answer a few of them, so please do send them in. But we mentioned as well that the business of being a writer, the book that's displayed above Chris's head, which you are rewriting at the moment and updating, as we obviously talked about how the industry changes and you want that to be updated. So what one piece of advice or information at that book would you like to share with us? And maybe we can touch on that very quickly.
I think one of the biggest messages in the book, and it's right up front, is that most authors don't make a living off book sales at the beginning of their careers. And this is a message in the United States that has to be hit on again and again and again for all of the folks in creative writing programs, because they don't get much of a business education, and sometimes they graduate with a lot of debt, and they don't realize that once they get their book deal, they're not set. That's like it's like step one of a very long journey. And so book advances are not a living wage. Your book sales will not be a living wage. And you have to really be in it for multiple books. You have to have a backlist until you're going to see the books really begin to pay the bills. And also, obviously, so much depends on the sort of genre that you're writing in. So if you're expecting that to happen with poetry, well, maybe if you're the poet laureate, maybe if you have a lot of other things going on that would help sell your poems or your writing. But most people have other ways of earning a living aside from just selling the books. So my book generally goes into all of the different ways that this happens. And having a day job is a perfectly acceptable way to make it work out.
Yeah. It's a very scary thing, talking about being scared. And we've spoken to people before in the community that have mentioned they spent thousands of pounds getting their book cover done and getting it edited and stuff. And then they haven't released that book yet. And they're already thousands of pounds in debt and they're hoping to make that money back off their book. And we all know what kind of a nightmare it is to release a book and then realize you've got to learn to market, because it's such a difficult thing to do. So yeah, pick up that book. We'll leave it a link in the description. And yeah, I'm sure some of the people in the comments will love to get hold of that. But a couple of people have said they love you already, so I'm assuming, I followed you for a while, so I'm assuming they might already have that. So Chris, do you want to get into any staple questions before we get some questions from the community?
Yeah, I mean, mine is really breaking up quite a bit, so I'm going to leave it to you, Agate, because I'm in spits and sparks of internet connection.
Excellent. Brilliant. Okay, Jane, just going over to the fiction side then. If you could take the ending of any fictional story and change the ending of a fictional story, which one would you change and why?
Well, this is maybe a little bit of a cheat. But one of the biggest disappointments of my life, as far as storytelling goes, is that the film version of Lord of the Rings did not have the full ending.
Wow.
So, and it's even kind of silly for me to say that, because I do feel like the film version had like 3 different endings pasted on. They couldn't decide where to really yell cut the end. But they didn't have, like, if you read the book version, there is a very long way to go. There isn't, let me pull back. There isn't really what I would consider a conventional happy ending. They go back to the Shire, and then they have a whole other mess to clean up. Things are destroyed. The bad guys are still kind of sitting on their land. And there's just more suffering. And I feel like it really makes the point that you can't go back home again, not to the way it was. And so I feel like the film version did not convey that.
That's a great answer.
Yeah, Frodo in the film just went back, did he?
Yeah, it was just like, oh, it's all exactly how I left it. That is not what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I think even his cup of tea on the side was still the same.
Right.
Yeah, love for that answer. Okay, if you could take any character from the world of fiction, again, TVs, films, and books, and take that character, and obviously you're a non-fiction writer, put that into any story, or let's say take that character out for the day, maybe. What character are you going to take, and what are you going to do with them?
Well, I can certainly talk about fiction, the character that I wish could have come to life, and it's Anne from Anne of Green Gables. I mean, who wouldn't want her as a best friend? I mean, that would just be incredible in every single way. So
what would you do if you could take Anne out for the day? Where would you take her?
Oh gosh. I mean, it really wouldn't matter. But I mean, if you were on Prince Edward Island, it would be nice to do a high tea and then go to a recital afterwards where she would, perform, and
Nice.
and then maybe cross the lake in a boat and do a scene from the Lady of Shalott or something. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, we've got some questions in the chat. If you're watching now live, just put the questions in there, and we'll ask Jane those before we leave. But yeah, so keep them coming. There are some questions in there.
Everyone remembers that scene, apparently. Brilliant. Okay. The question I mentioned earlier, in fact, is one we like to ask. So looking back on your career many years down the line, on your deathbed, as Chris likes to call it, and you're looking back at that career, what does success look like to you?
Well, especially in my line of work, it's about whose lives did you change or affect for the good, let's hope. From a young age, every Christmas I watch It's a Wonderful Life, and it's kind of burned into me that doesn't everyone want that final scene where or they actually, not just the final scene, but rather this picture of where your friends and family would have been had you not been around. And so you hope to have that same experience as George, where you can realize your actions actually did make a difference.
Amazing. Yeah, I like that. Okay, questions from the community. Joanne has one for Jane, and she says, Jane, I have migrated my newsletter entirely from Substack, and she did go on to say migrated it, everybody's gone there sort of thing, and she did it all for free, right? And I love the platform. Is that okay? Yeah,
it's totally okay. As long as you're comfortable using Substack, even better if you're already reading a lot of other writers' Substacks. The only warning I would offer is that you're on rented land. So, and that just means who knows what will happen to Substack in the future. They could be sold, they could go under new ownership, and they could change the rules on you in a way that you don't like. So, as long as you're comfortable with that potentially happening, and that's true of so many services we use, right?
Yeah.
Be ready to take your names and go somewhere else if it changes in a way that's unpalatable to you. So that this happened to me recently with X or Twitter. I eventually decided enough's enough. I'm no longer using this platform.
It's so frustrating, isn't it?
We're not at that stage just yet, but we're very, very close.
Yeah.
Musk has definitely peed us off. But what I like about Substack is that they only make money when everybody else is making money,
Right.
and the shared system. So, that's quite good. But I completely agree with that. I actually wrote that down. Rented land, so get your own website sorted and get people coming directly to the source. I like it.
Would you advise sort of sharing lands, if that makes sense? So using Substack, but also using something else, or is that going to complicate kind of the newsletter, obviously, email list and things like that?
Yeah, it's very rare that I would recommend doing both unless you have distinctive purposes for each. And I find that doesn't describe very many people. They're trying to like do the same content in two places, and that I definitely don't recommend that.
Yeah. And one more question for me, if I can steal one in here. What's interesting is people lean on social media a lot for their building the author brand, and it can get very mixed up and complicated if you're using too many different sort of platforms. How do you suggest people deal with using social media to build their brand and kind of market their books?
Find the one that is sustainable for you. So going back to that idea of sustainability, I find that some people are very, let's say, text oriented. And so a place like Substack or Twitter or Threads is very conducive to how they prefer to communicate. That actually describes me. There are other people who are really great at visuals, and they do well with something like Instagram. And then there are people who are really good at being entertaining on video, and they might look at YouTube Shorts or TikTok. So I don't think, I mean, it's rare that you find someone who's hitting it out of the park on all of those, unless they're like a professional content creator. So I think you have to find the one that you're like, oh, you're okay showing up every day, and it's not creating either a burden or anxiety. I would say, in addition to this, you need to mute or block as needed. It is not your responsibility to listen to everyone on there. That is not the point. You need to find the people that you actually want to have a conversation with, that like you would actually welcome having over for a cocktail or meeting at a bar. That's what, to me, that's what social media is about. And hopefully through the conversations and visibility, you do attract more like-minded people. I do have there's a blog post that I just did last week. It's actually an interview with someone who has done really well on TikTok with cooking. And he's only been on it 2 years. And you can just tell he really loves doing it. Like he's just, he approaches it with genuine enthusiasm. And he has very firm boundaries about behavior he will and will not accept in his circle. And I think he's a good model to follow from that perspective. Not that you should be on TikTok, but I think that applies to all social media.
I love that. And what was quite fun is that you said someone you'd invite for a cocktail or to the bar. So I'm guessing, I get a picture of you there. It's not inviting them over for coffee. So get the drinks in. One more question from Halo Scott. Thank you very much for your questions, guys. Halo says, what writing trends do you see for the next 5 years or 10 years? I know you mentioned that you can't really delve into or speculate, but is there anything you can see coming that you might be able to sort of discuss very quickly?
The boundaries between self-publishing and traditional publishing are very blurry. I mean, I'm tempted to say they're going to disappear in some regard, just because I see how traditional publishers are starting initiatives or imprints that are catering to self-published authors and letting self-published authors essentially keep going with their own digital editions, ebook, audio, and then they help facilitate print, retail, and distribution, and things like bigger publicity and events or translations. You also see agents representing self-publishing authors for rights deals, and if the author wants it, they can help facilitate print deals, but not always. So it's just very interesting to me how it's rare these days, even with super successful self-published authors, to find one who's unagented, who is not dealing with international rights, who isn't playing somewhere in the traditional, and vice versa. Almost every traditional publisher has some sort of initiative meant to skim the cream off of the top of the self-publishing community.
I like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Very interesting. That some of the most successful self-published authors we've tried to get on the show, and they seem the busiest people that we've spoken to get on and stuff. So yeah, long may it continue, that hybrid, I think, because like I say, I think everyone upscaling through AI and stuff, and just getting better at everything by having, an Ask. This is showing my age now, but having an Ask Jeeves assistant in your pocket that can help you, should make everyone better. But Jane, obviously we've gone over the hour point now, but that's been absolutely fantastic to talk to you, and so valuable for everyone watching tonight. And just your journey in itself, and the clear passion that you have for seeing the bigger picture, which again is not always possible in these fields, and just trying to help writers be successful as well. And obviously we need more people like you. I've just seen Halo's comment in the chat, and that's what made me smile. All hail Ask Jeeves. But yeah, thank you from me.
Yeah, me too. I loved it. And Joanne says, this was so brilliant, enlightening, and helpful. Thank you so much, Jane. Yeah, I second that. Brilliant guest, and so much more information we could pick from your brain, but we can't because we haven't got time. But what you can do is you can go to Jane's website, which is janefriedman.com/books. .com, but then go to the /book section, and you can find all of Jane's books on there, including The Business of Being a Writer, which is coming out again next year.
Spring next year.
So yeah, definitely get ready for that. And one more thing, I do apologize, we've skipped on this, the hot sheet that you've put under your name there. I mentioned that at the start. Can you give that little plug?
Yeah, so I have a paid newsletter. It's not on Substack. It's called Hot Sheet. The Hot Sheet. It's at hotsheetpub.com. It comes out every 2 weeks. If you're a professional author trying to make money, it basically keeps you up on news and trends in the book publishing industry.
Amazing. Halo says, I've aggressively stalked Jane for years, from the shadows, no doubt. Joanne says, fantastic website. And she says, the hot sheet rocks too. There you go. Jane, thank you so much. It's been an honor for us to chat to you. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in and supporting us on our new journey on Substack as well. So let's see how that develops. We'll keep you in the know about it. And again, if you've got questions for me, for Chris, for Jane, maybe if you want to send us some follow-up, you can through email, and we'll see what we can do with those. So thank you very much, and we will see you all next week, Chris. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.